All right, welcome everyone to this class on Noahide laws. Again, I want to welcome everyone. Spoke last week about finding a rabbi. Ray thought it was so great; he put it out there to the world. Got a lot of very good, feedback on that. But topic for today. Topic for today is going to be, I think, a hot topic also, and that's let's say for the next couple of weeks. It's about the topic. It's about the topic of Shabbos, and I think this is one of the most confusing parts, for Noahides, because you see, what do Noahides do, or some Noahides, or super Noahides, or whatever you want to call them? They observe Shabbos. Now, maybe not the exact same way. There's that. Right? There's a lot of confusion, bottom line. Right? In other words, a lot of people have been encouraged. I don't know why. Right? We'll see what the issue is. A lot of people have been encouraged to keep some form of Shabbos, thinking Noahide or Ger Toshav. Now, we've spoken about that. Definitely spoken about that. And, the Rambam, when speaking about, this idea, says clear, it's a Ger Toshav. Right? Don't want to be misrepresented here, but that's what the Rambam says. Not talking about a regular Noahide here. He's talking about a Ger Toshav, right? In general. Even though, right, Ger Toshav, misunderstood. Definitely misunderstood today. As well, the relation to Shabbos. The relationship to Shabbos. So we're going to have to hit a lot of different things to explain. And as we're going to see, there are many things that are not so simple. People want to try and make it out, to be simple. I had a whole thing. Been going back and forth with someone about something. They quoted me a source, a couple of sources, claiming that it said what it said. And it didn't. That was obviously their interpretation, right? And so usually what's the first thing you do when you look at a source? You look at the commentaries. Now, if it was such an obvious question, the commentaries would have gone to town. Commentaries say nothing, right? Absolutely zero. Right, so which leads you to believe it's not a question, right? Definitely not a question. So here, I think one of the most, in a long day here, most misunderstood ideas, and that is about Shabbos. So we're going to look at a lot of different sources, a number of different sources. So says Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish, he used to disagree a lot with his Rabbi Yochanan, right? Many times in Talmud, they go back and forth. And says Reish Lakish, a non-Jew who refrains from labor for an entire day, liable for death penalty. Why? Liable for a death penalty because the Torah tells me, Genesis chapter 8, verse 22, day and night they shall not cease. They got to work every day. Can't take a day off. And say, I'm taking a day off like the Jews. That we saw before. It's called Chidush Das. That's making up a new religion. Go tell that to some people. That's making up a new religion. The master said the warning is sufficient to warrant their death. Said Ravina, this is so even if a non-Jew refrain working on Monday. Doesn't mean Saturday. It means any day during the week. If that's true, then let it be counted among the Noahide laws. That's the obvious question. So if this is really true, then tell me it's a Noahide laws. One of the laws. The answer is they're enumerated as prohibitions. And they're not listed according to positive aspects. Right? One answer. One answer over here, Sanhedrin 58b. Now we're gonna flush it out here. It says Reish Lakish, non-Jew who refrains from any labor for an entire day, liable for a death penalty. Because what does the Torah tell me? The Torah says, day and night they shall not cease. Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. Now, what does it mean? So if you look at it, maybe it's talking about seasons. But the seasons are never going to stop. But it says day and night, they shall not cease. Who's they? Man. So what's the verse talking about? Many things. When you look at a verse, what's the first thing you have to do? You have to understand the context. You have to see what it's talking about. See, I love people who, they don't care what the context is. Christians very good at this. They'll say, this is what it says, this is what it means. But what about what it said previous verse? Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, right? Case in point, Jeremiah chapter 30. New covenant. How can there be a new covenant? Goes against what God says. Got to listen to Moses. You got to listen to what he says. Can't add and subtract. But forget about that. What's the beginning of the chapter talking about? Jeremiah giving Mussar, yelling at the Jewish people. They have to reconnect to the old covenant. So it's a good question. What's the new covenant? Can't be something new. Internal logic tells me that. So Jeremiah is talking about reconnecting the old covenant. So they turn it into a pretzel. So you got to see what's going on. So what's the verse talking about over here? Noah and his descendants from disengaging in the labor of the world for an entire day. Positive command, which precludes what? Or precludes observance of Shabbat. Now, what's the question? What's the $1 million question here? Is the prohibition of not working a general prohibition or a specific prohibition for religious seasons? Now, interestingly enough, someone once told me many years ago, you go to Genesis chapter 2, God created Shabbat so I can keep it. So what's the obvious answer? What do you do with Exodus chapter 20? 10 Commandments. God gave Shabbos to who? To the Jewish people. When God created Shabbos, general thing. He created Shabbos. Okay. Very good. But who says the non-Jews are allowed to observe? It doesn't say anything. And it says it's the sign between me and the Jewish people, God says. Oh, forgot about that. Right? So the master said the warning is sufficient to warrant their death. All right. In general, a Noahide who breaks the Noahide laws, you don't really have to warn them. You could kill them, if they transgress. Right? But what does it mean over here? Warrants it that the warning's enough. The general rule. Right? For someone who transgresses, a Noahide commandment. Right? According to the Rambam, Laws of Kings, chapter 9, verse Halacha 14. There are certain prohibitions that are not subject to punishment by death. That we're going to see. Some are, some aren't. So the Rambam learns punishment for keeping Shabbos is a heavenly punishment. Not going to get killed in this world. Says Ravina, this is so even a non-Jew refrained from work on Monday. Who says it has to be on Saturday? Maybe they refrain on a different day. If they refrain on a different day, is that forbidden or not? So the explanation is, what does Ravina mean? See, what's going on over here is, you look at a piece of Talmud, you look at the Torah, it needs explanation. Torah, Talmud gives explanation, usually. Sometimes there are statements that are ambiguous, have to be clarified. But most of the Torah is ambiguous. That needs explanation. So here, Ravina, we need to explain. Comes along Rashi, the Gemara in Sanhedrin over there, 58b. Comes along the Ridvaz, the commentary in the Rambam, and Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory, the Igros Moshe. How do they understand Ravina? That non-Jews are prohibited from establishing a certain 24-hour period that they abstain from work for any reason. They just don't do work. So take a day off occasionally for rest only, no religious motivation, not a problem. Talking about religious motivation. Comes on the Yad Ramah. This is Sanhedrin 58b. And he says, only rest religiously motivated. Now, any non-Jew is going to take on Shabbos. It's not because, I just want to rest. It's religiously motivated, right? I think that's pretty clear. So it doesn't matter what the motivation is, monotheistic, pagan. It's religiously motivated. So either to establish a 24-hour period, the rest will work from health reasons. Again, not a problem, because they're not doing it for religious reasons. If they would decide to do it because of religious reasons, different issue. Right? It's a totally different issue. So then there's the question, why don't we let it be part of the Noahide laws? You got to tell me it's so severe. Tell me it's part of the Noahide laws. So he said they're enumerated as prohibitions, but they're not listed according to their positive aspects. Now, what does that mean? To get Rashi, other Talmudic commentaries over-explain that the Noahide laws, we mentioned many times, are general categories. Right? The general categories according to negative aspects only. What's a negative aspect? What's a negative prohibition? You shall not do X. Now, that might include positive commands. Could be. So what are they? Subsets. What we'll call a subclass over here of the general prohibition. So we saw before, dinim, i.e., the requirement to establish law courts, seems to be a positive command. But we look at it as primarily negative because they have to enforce other negative prohibitions. So the question is, how do we view this? Right? How do we view it? The Noahide laws are an umbrella. They're an umbrella, general categories. So there are subset categories over here. And usually with negative connotation. Don't do this, don't do that. So that's the first thing. Right? That's the first thing, first source. Second source is Yevamos 48b, the idea of Shabbat the Ger Toshav. Now, the Gemara in Sanhedrin over there seems to be contradicted by our source right here. Why? Because Talmud over there is discussing a slave, an indentured servant that is purchased before Shabbos. And therefore, he can't do work on behalf of his master. So too today, a non-Jew cannot do work for a Jew in general on Shabbos for the sake of a Jew. Right? You can't do it for the sake of a Jew. Now, there are a lot of caveats on that. We're not necessarily going to go into it. Point is, you can't work on the behalf of a Jew. So that same Bryce of this Tanaitic statement comes up with an interesting idea. What does it say? It says, 6 days you shall work, 7th day you shall rest. Your ox, your donkey will rest. The son of your maidservant and the ger, so that they may be refreshed. Exodus chapter 23, verse 12. Now, what ger are we talking about? If you're like some people, they'll say ger always represents their ger. It's either going to represent a ger toshav or convert. Now, a lot of times you'll say if they're already a Jew, why does it say, why are you going to mention a convert? Because converts have certain limitations. Aren't they full-fledged Jews? They are, but there are certain limitations that they have. Right? A convert, let's say, for example, can't be a rabbinic court judge. I have to clarify, what cases. Can have a position of authority. Right? Can a convert be a head of a yeshiva? Give classes in a yeshiva. Be a rabbi of a synagogue. Right? A Jewish woman who's a convert cannot marry a Kohen. There are limitations. Right? Most things, a lot of things they can do. There are certain limitations. Some of them are technical. But without that, I'm just pointing out, the ger over here refers to ger toshav, i.e. a resident alien. So you have to know. And you have to look and see. When the Torah says ger, what type of ger are we talking about? Right? Talking the super Noahide? Or are we talking about a Ger Toshav or a convert? You have to see in the context. Now here, the Gemara uses the word Ger. And we're referring to a Ger Toshav. Now, it would seem, what's the verse telling me here? That a Ger Toshav has to observe Shabbos. That's what it sounds like. How can it be Ger Toshav is not Jewish? We already saw from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Non-Jews can't observe Shabbos. It's not going to be a Ger Toshav. So, since the verse uses a generic term, i.e. the term Ger, it might be Torah means a Ger Tzedek, convert to Judaism. Now again, we'd have to ask the question, if they're a convert, then what are we saying over here? Obviously, a convert's a Jew. And if a Jew can't do work, a convert can't do work. Right? So you have to see the context here. So a person may say, I don't know, it refers to a Ger Toshav. Because if it refers to a Ger Tzedek, right, a convert to Judaism, because the verse tells me the 7th day is the Sabbath. You shall do no labor, both you and the Ger within your gates. All right, tells me. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. Convert can't do work on Shabbos. So why is the Torah going to repeat it? Good question for the Karaites. You know, Karaites don't believe in oral law. So what are you going to do over here? Repeat the same thing. Emphasis. No. Why does it repeat it? So here the Gemara understands. What is it? Why does it say Ger within your gates? Talk about a Ger Tzedek, a full convert. You got another verse already taught us. A Ger Tzedek must observe Shabbos as a Jew. So our passage must be referring to a Ger Tzedek. Because there's no other type of Ger. Right? No other type of Ger over here. Not going to refer to a Ger Toshav. We're talking about a Ger Toshav as a non-Jew. If he's a non-Jew, guess what? He can't observe Shabbos. So now the question is, what do we do with this? Rashi explains that a Ger Toshav must keep Shabbos. That's easy. So Ger Toshav not an issue. He has to keep Shabbos. Why? Because Gemara in 69b. They want to desecrate Shabbos like someone who worships idols. And Rashi also applies this to what? To a Ger Toshav. In a Ger Toshav, disavowed idolatry goes against idolatry over here. So de facto, I understand if he goes against idolatry, he's got to keep Shabbos. So Rashi's learning that it's only talking about idolaters from observing Shabbos. Otherwise, Ger Toshav should be allowed. Right? But he's saying non-Jews not allowed. Right? We have a distinction. Ger Toshav may be allowed. Idolater not. Comes on Tosfos. What does Tosfos say? It's the opposite. Ger Toshav, no obligation at all to observe Shabbos. Not only that, he can't do it. Why not? Because I have the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Because if he does, he's liable for a death penalty. So what are we talking about over here? Whether or not a non-Jew can do work for a Jew on Shabbos. That's the case. That's what we're talking about. And that seems the intent over here. If you look at the verse, it says 6 days you shall work, 7th day you shall rest. Your ox, your donkey shall have rest. Son of your maidservant the Ger, so that they may be refreshed. So now, first part of the Torah tells me, this verse discusses animals or servants working on behalf of a Jew. Right? Obviously, a non-Jew, a servant, an animal, they're not obligated to keep Shabbos. So the first part of what the Brisa says in the Talmud, what's it talking about? It's talking about a Jew servant working on his behalf. Second part is talking about a Ger Toshav, who's forbidden from working on behalf of a Jew. So I understand a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew, can't work for a Jew. Now, so Rashi and Tosfos seem to disagree. Right? So the first part here is to understand what they said. Right? Now the question is, why do they disagree? What do they disagree? Right? What's mentioned in the verse? What's mentioned in the verse is an ox, a donkey, a servant. They have no free will over here. They have to do the will of the master. Ger Toshav, totally different. He's completely autonomous. He's got free reign to do what he wants. Comes on Toshav and explains, why do we include a Ger Toshav? Because you may think a Ger Toshav is a non-Jew. He doesn't belong to your household. He can labor on your behalf. He can work for you on Shabbos. Comes along the verse and tells me, no, you're not allowed to. And that would go hand in hand with this discussion. That would make sense. Because I would think if he's independent, he can do work for me. No, not allowed to. Now, Rashi, on the other hand, pretty difficult to understand. The Gemara over there in Eruvin, in 69b, what's it talking about? A Jew desecrates Shabbos. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about a Ger Toshav. That's not what the Gemara says. Gemara is talking about desecration of Shabbos by a Jew. Now, if you're going to tell me it refers to a Ger Toshav, I got a problem. Because there are other pre-existing reasons to equate Jewish desecration of Shabbos to that of Ger Toshav. Oh, maybe there are similarities. But the comparison is made for what purpose? For explaining when a person desecrates Shabbos, a Jew, he may be trusted or combined with other Jews, right, when it comes to Jewish law. In other words, what are we looking at here? We're looking at a Jew who can be treated as a non-Jew, i.e. an idolater, in certain areas of Torah law. But again, it's very unclear how Rashi defines Ger Toshav. What's the point here? It's going to be kind of shocking, but a secular Jew, doesn't matter what they know or they don't know. If they grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, right? My example I always give. No offense to anyone who's a potato farmer, grew up in Idaho. It means they don't know anything about Judaism. All right? So they desecrate Shabbos. If they desecrate Shabbos in public, they have the status of a Jew. Now, why? Why is that so severe? There are ramifications if they touch your wine, which I call spiritual cooties. If they touch your wine, that is not cooked. You can't drink it. A Jew can't drink it. If they cook your food from beginning to end in your pot and you don't do anything to stir it up, you can't eat it. Same status as a non-Jew. Why so severe? Come Friday night. Friday night we make Kiddush. We stand up, we give testimony, we say, according to Genesis chapter 2, we say that God stopped creating on Shabbos. And God created Shabbos over here. When we stand, we give testimony. What are we talking about? We're talking about after creation. So if you deny, you don't make Kiddush or you don't keep Shabbos properly and all that, you're denying God created the world. Right? Obviously makes you a heretic. Totally makes you a heretic. Not only that, they make a blessing, I shouldn't answer amen to it. Can't call them up to the Torah. I mean, there are many ramifications for the secular Jew. Doesn't matter he grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho. We don't care about that. For some things, there are leniencies. He'll still be liable. Definitely be liable, just like he did it by accident. Right? But at the same time, if he does something egregious, desecrate Shabbos, intermarry, whatever, right? So it's going to be payback. There's going to be serious payback. You know, it's going to be total payback over here. Ignorance isn't bliss. For certain things, maybe it is. You know, a person won't get punished as much. Okay. But in general, they're going to pay a serious price over here. Now, there's a lot of difficulty trying to explain what Rashi means. Right? And the Rambam in the Laws of Shabbos, chapter 20, halacha 14. In the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch and Rabbi Chaim, number 304, and other codifiers as well, decide that the halacha goes like Tosfos, not like Rashi. And even though a Ger Toshav is included the prohibition of Gentile observance of Shabbos, so a Ger Toshav cannot keep Shabbos either. Now, it doesn't matter, we don't have Ger Toshav today anyway. We don't have a Jubilee year. So if we don't have a Jubilee year, there's no Ger Toshav. So it doesn't apply. But at the same time, over here, we got an inclusion that a Ger Toshav cannot observe Shabbos. Even if there was a status of Ger Toshav. Doesn't matter. Can't observe Shabbos. Now we got another Gemara. Krisus 9a. Similar discussion over here. A rabbi's taught in the Brisa, Ger Toshav may do work for himself on Shabbos, the same degree as a Jew on the intermediate days of a festival. Now, the intermediate days of a festival, let's say on Passover or Sukkot, so Jews can only do labor that is needed for enjoyment of the festival or to prevent a loss. You can't just turn on lights whenever you want. You have to need it. It has to be a loss. There are certain things you're allowed to do. A person really shouldn't work. If they can get away without it, take sick days or whatever. But in general, Ger Toshav can only do work for Shabbos, same degree as a Jew on these intermediate days. Comes along Rabbi Akiva as a Jew on the festivals. Oh, he's even more stringent. Right? Because on the festivals, what work is he allowed to do? What's the difference between a festival and Shabbos? You're allowed to cook if you have a pre-existing flame. You're allowed to carry in a public domain. You don't need an Eruv. Right? So said Rabbi Akiva. Comes along Rabbi Yossi, and he says the Ger Toshav may labor on Shabbos for himself, just as a Jew may on a weekday. In other words, he can do anything. Whatever a Jew can do during the week, he can do on Shabbos. Not a problem. So, really, there's nothing preventing a Ger Toshav from working on Shabbos. So, a Ger Toshav, no matter what anyone tells you, you heard it here. A Ger Toshav is a de facto Noahide. Let's make that clear. Not anything else. De facto a Noahide. And we can infer over here there's no problem. No prohibition from doing labor on Shabbos. None. None whatsoever. So there's a positive command as well, requiring inhabitants of the world constantly engage in the world. And that would preclude the observance of Shabbos. In other words, keep them back. Keep them busy. Keep non-Jews busy all day long. At least they won't bother us. You give them a free day, do nothing, they'll go nuts. Right? So over here, they have to constantly be busy. They're not allowed to take off time for religious reasons, like a Jew would on Shabbos. They're allowed to work, clear as day. They're allowed to work over here. That's what it sounds like. Comes on the Midrash. Right, comes on the Midrash over here. Now, the Midrash explains what's going on. There's the name Rabbi Yossi, son of Chanina, a Gentile who observes the Shabbos before being circumcised. Now again, another factor. If it's a guy, he has to have circumcision, bris milah. He doesn't have circumcision, observe Shabbos, death penalty. Why? Because this is not commanded, right? He's not commanded over here. He's not commanded to keep it. And if he keeps it, you say, oh, big deal. So what if he kept it? Death penalty. What's your reason for saying a Gentile who observes Shabbos liable to the death penalty? Comes along Rav Chaim the son of Rabbah, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. If a king and a queen are sitting in conversation, and someone comes and barges between them, I mean, pretty severe thing. They're in the middle of having a nice conversation, and someone barges in. Aren't they liable for death penalty? So what's the parable? So too, Shabbos between Israel and the Jewish people. Israel and God. Because it says, you're speaking to the children of Israel, saying you must keep my Shabbos, for it's a sign between me and the children of Israel. Something seems intimate here. Exodus chapter 31, verse 13. Right? It's a sign between God and the Jewish people. What are you barging in on our things? Right? That's what I would say. It's kind of ironic Non-Jews want to observe Shabbos. Well, didn't they reject giving to the Torah? They didn't want the Torah, the Gemara says. Avodah Zarah 2b to 3a. God goes to all the nations. They don't want the Torah. God comes to Jewish people. You want the Torah? They said, sure. You want to know what's written in it? They said, we don't care. They said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We don't care. We will hear, then we will do. So to me, it's the ultimate in chutzpah. A non-Jew now comes along and says, I want in on Shabbos. What are you talking about? You had no opportunity. The Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, you had no opportunity up until the Tower of Babel, to that generation, to be with Abraham. But the Ramchal says God had mercy, even up until giving to the Torah of Mount Sinai. Non-Jews could have joined. Okay, they didn't join, they didn't want. Fine. So now if they want to join, they have to go through conversion, or if they want to stay a non-Jew, they can hold by the Noahide laws. But I think it's the ultimate in chutzpah. Now they come generations later, I want in. Well, too late. I had someone once tell me, if I would have been in that generation, I would have been in my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents' generation, I never would have rejected the Torah. I would have kept the Torah. You know what I answered? So what? Why do I care what you would have done? Nobody cares what you would have done. It's already done. It's sealed. You want to be part of the Jewish people? Join. You don't want to be part of the Jewish people? That's fine. You know, you can stay in on Jew and have a portion of the world to come. But now you want to come after all the nations rejected it, and now you want to come and say, I want a peace? No. Chutzpah. I would say it's the ultimate in chutzpah. Because here, Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, it's a sign between me and the children of Israel, God says. Not the nations. Nation didn't want. Coffman's language, chump don't want it, chump don't get it. You don't get it over here. I don't care what you would have done, you would have thought, you would have answered. Doesn't matter. Right? They rejected the Torah. Now you want in? It's too late. Either you got to go through conversion, or you stay in Noahide. So a non-Jew comes and places himself between the Jewish people, right? You know, they're not circumcised liable for death penalty. Now, prior to the giving of the Torah, what happened? What went on? It was a privilege, Shabbos was. For who? For God. Not for anyone else. Because he wasn't commanding anybody to keep it. Right? So someone tells me, come on, Genesis chapter 2. God created, didn't tell anyone to keep it. The general thing. Till you get to Exodus chapter 20. So the commandment of observing Shabbos, which is a divine day of rest given to the Jewish people alone. Part of the unique covenant with God. There are three things we've mentioned before. There are three things that are assigned between God and the Jewish people. One of them is circumcision, bris milah. One of them is tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. Third thing is Shabbos. It's kind of interesting. Non-Jews now want to wedge their way in. They want to wedge their way and say, no, we want a part of it. What do you mean you want a part of it? It's a special sign between God and the Jewish people. So if that's true, why are you wedging your way in? Coffman over here would say, get out. You don't deserve a place. You know, I would hit them upside the head with a sledgehammer. You come in and you want to take what belongs to us? You should have taken it before. But I wasn't there. I didn't participate. Maybe I could have swayed the masses. You know, maybe I could have convinced people. They didn't want it. If they didn't want it, and, you know, this is an argument I would use. Again, there are technical arguments here. But I think, a checkmate argument is, well, you rejected the Torah. Till the book of Exodus, God gives the Torah to us, but you still had an opportunity. And now you want to sneak your way in the back door and say, I want part of it, even though you rejected it. I call that chutzpah. I think it's chutzpah. It doesn't belong to you. Totally doesn't belong to you. You might tell me maybe certain aspects you could do, whatever. You want to do certain things, not categories of forbidden work. Okay, you want to have a Shabbos meal, you want this. But, but I'll ask the $1.5 million question because I always up the ante here. I'll ask the $1.5 million question. And that is, if you're a non-Jew, and we said this, I don't know, I've said it a lot, maybe not here, but I said it a lot. If you're going to stay a non-Jew, stay a non-Jew. If you want to be a Jew, convert. And if you can't convert, okay. Not everyone's made to be Jewish over here. You cannot straddle both worlds. Can't do it. But you want to take something that's so holy. So holy. You got non-Jews putting up mezuzahs. You have to say, what's the matter with putting up a mezuzah? There are certain things that are inherently holy that only belong to Jews. Tefillin, one of them. Right? Mezuzah, second thing. Non-Jew in the process of conversion, different issue. Right? But there are certain things that are taboo. Right? If you say it's taboo, everyone wants to do it. Right? It's taboo. Doesn't belong to you. I can't even tell you, and Ray can attest to this. You see it, I see it all the time. People saying you can do this, they can do that, they can do the other thing. And they're talking, as English would say, a bunch of rubbish. It's all rubbish. Totally not true. See the way, people try and explain things. Okay, you want to show you have certain knowledge? Fine. Someone, after I kept telling them, that's not what the verses mean. Well, do you agree this is the right translation? I said, yes, it's the right translation, right? It's not a bad translation. Good, but it doesn't say what you say it says. Doesn't say. Totally doesn't say it. They're inferring that's what it means. Doesn't say that. If it said it, explicitly fine, right? Now, obviously, if it's something egregious and it's something like way out there, the commentaries are going to say something. So I looked it up. Commentaries say nothing. You know why the commentaries say nothing? Because it's not a question. Totally not a question. King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, Ein Dvar Chadash Tachas HaShemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. The commentaries don't ask it, it's not a question. Because they would have asked it. They're much smarter than us. Early commentators, later commentators, much, much smarter than us. So if they don't ask it, it's not a question. So you got to now figure out where you went wrong. Right? And this other thing, they went wrong totally sideways. Totally sideways. Even if there's a lenient opinion, okay. But if the majority opinion says not that way, now you want to turn the Torah into a pretzel. That's what happens. But I want to do it. See, that's it. But I do it all the time. So what? There are people who do terrible things all the time. It means it's right. You're going to go according to, against the majority opinion. You want to say, I have who to rely on. That's one thing. But if you have an agenda, that's why in the Haggadah, by the evil son, you don't give him an answer. You blunt his teeth. Why do you blunt his teeth? Because they're asking a question. Right? For example, right? Someone will say, I think Judaism discriminates against women. You know what the answer is? Oh. And I think, women are totally treated poorly. Oh. Why do you keep saying oh? Because you didn't ask me a question. You made a statement. So now, if I were to ask you, do you think Judaism discriminates against women? What would you say? Oh, that's the question. But if someone's got an agenda, say, I want to do this and I want to do that, you're not going to answer them. Be a fool to answer them. Why? They have an agenda. Right? It's like talking to a brick. It's like talking to a missionary. You answer them, they come back with something else. You answer that question, they come back with something else because they have no answers. They're just programmed what to say. So it's information can be good, it can be bad. Depends how you use it. We spoke last week how it's so crucial to have proper rabbinic authority. Now everybody knows if you don't have proper rabbinic authority and people are doing what they want and they think they're rabbinic authority, different issue. Totally different issue. And then when you see what they do and you see what they act, then but a person gets caught up, gets caught up in the web. Derech Eretz Kidma L'Torah. You gotta be a mensch. You gotta have proper character traits. You want to disagree, okay, bring me sources. Show me, but be respectful. Oh, you're gonna call me out, you're gonna call Rabbi Singer out, you're gonna say this, that, and the other. It's not being respectful, it's being a blowhard. totally being a blowhard. Right? And they'll say, oh, you don't know how to learn. Really? Really? Right? So, so over here, I would say, I think it's ultimate chutzpah. But here we have technical things here. You see that a Ger Toshav can work on Shabbos. You can see that observing Shabbos for a non-Jew is bad, forbidden, death penalty. Now the question is going to be, and we're gonna flush this out, in the next coming weeks, and that is what is there a connection? Maybe there is some sort of connection between a non-Jew and Shabbos. I would say there should be very little connection. What connection can a non-Jew have to Shabbos? It's a sign between God and the Jewish people. Where do non-Jews fit in that? See a non-Jew wearing phylacteries? Tefillin? Come on. Circumcision, okay. Difference of opinion, whether it's good against cancer, it's not good against cancer, whatever. But, these are things that make Jews unique. These are 3 things that God says are a sign between me and you, the Jewish people. Then a non-Jew comes along and says, I want in, I can do also. Come on. Yeah, any questions on that? Someone points out, there are a lot of justifications. Keep a partial Shabbos, put a 7 on the mezuzah. Again, don't straddle. You want to stay in non-Jew? Stay in non-Jew. I say all the time, I could keep people busy for things that they're allowed to learn for the next 250 years. Not a problem. If I would live that long. Not a problem. Jewish law that applies to them, you could learn. Torah, Tanakh, Jewish philosophy, Musar, plenty out there. But what do they want to do? They want to do things that don't apply to them. Right? That's, that's the kicker. It's like, you have some women that are feminists, and they'll say, I want to learn the Talmud. I want to learn Gemara. But you know what? The Gemara says it's not good for women to do it. So why do you want to do it? No, it's not about an agenda. It's not about I want to learn, but the Gemara says it's not good for you. They don't hold by what the Gemara says. People have an agenda. Yeah. Any other questions? Itri, go ahead. You can unmute yourself if you want. You asked it. Okay. Is it true the soul of the Noahides or non-Jews were indeed present when the Torah was offered? It's a good question. A convert, we understand their soul was at Mount Sinai. Convert soul was at Mount Sinai, got messed up. How does the soul get messed up? Into marriage, assimilation. 1 generation, 2 generations, 5 generations, whatever. That soul somehow became not Jewish. What I just said is a whole thing in Kabbalah. How that can work. How can a soul change? How can, sometimes, a soul could go from female to male or vice versa. Right? How does that work? Don't know. Right? It's Kabbalah. But doesn't seem like their soul was there. Doesn't seem like it was there at Mount Sinai. Sorry. Question was, were the souls of Noahides when the Torah was offered? Yeah, they were there. There were non-Jews there. Yeah, you have to understand most of the non-Jewish world were idolaters. So how many Noahides could there have been? Doesn't seem like it's a whole wide movement back then. And throughout history, has not been because of the strong power we mentioned at the very beginning, the strong power of idolatry and and coercion and all that. It's only come up recently in the last 70 years. Were there individuals there that weren't idolaters? Could be. Could be. But you have to understand, when Abraham came on the scene, the whole world was idolaters. Pretty much. And he brought absolute monotheism to the world. So he was convincing the world through looking at a Torah by design, that there was a God who created the world. And that we had obligations. Everybody else, walked around, They'd walk around with their pocket God. They're like, here's Bob. Don't leave home without him. Everyone had their pocket God. And he came out and convinced the world. Totally convinced the world. Right? But again, that's why the Torah calls him Avraham HaIvri. He wasn't Jewish. Not Abraham the Jew. Mistranslation. Abraham on the other side. He's on one side of the world. The whole world's on the other side. He fought against the whole world. So how many Noahides could there have been? At the time that the Torah is given, handful, maybe. I don't think it was a huge amount. Doesn't sound like it. The whole world was pagan. Even with what Abraham did and what Sarah did, once they left, all the converts sort of went to pot. They didn't have a leader. And people back to idolatry. Idolatry was very strong. We can't imagine what it is, but it was very, very strong. So, in that case, how many non-Jews were Noahides at that time? Can't imagine the whole heck of a lot. Just because the power of idolatry was so strong. That's what I would say. Any other questions? So someone asks, were our souls present actually rejected it even though we accepted the mitzvahs now? That's not a contradiction. In other words, the fact that your soul, might have maybe stayed a non-Jewish soul. I don't know if, if Noahides had a Jewish soul and then be non-Jewish or whatever. Right? I don't think that would be the case. But even if their souls were present and rejected it, back then, right? Who's to say they come back and they don't reject it now? Right? Right? Who says, there's no question. The Torah is being given. Who says non-Jews accepted Noahide laws then? You'll tell me it was passed down, right? From Adam to Noah, and all that. The question is, when the Torah is being given, all the nations don't want it. So there must have been non-Jews who rejected idolatry, right? They certainly rejected idolatry. So it could be that, maybe we're non-Jews that accepted it, meaning that accepted Noahide laws. But even if the soul didn't, who says it can't accept it now? Maybe for a lot of non-Jews, that's what they're here for. They're here to fix up that part. They're here to reconnect to that part. Right? That's not a contradiction. That's definitely not a contradiction. Right? Even if they rejected it before, who says they can't accept it now? What do you do with Baalei Tshuva? Right? Their soul is Jewish, but they didn't keep Torah mitzvahs. And now they come back and they keep Torah mitzvahs. So what happened? Most of the world was Orthodox more than 200 years ago. And they veered off, but they had different things. When people sort of started to veer off, but most of the Jewish world was Orthodox. So what happened? So there's tremendous amount of assimilation and intermarriage. And so those Jews, 90%, go by the wayside. You got the other 10% that are keeping Torah mitzvahs. You got people coming back. You got Jews coming back. You got non-Jews becoming converts. Right, but that's a drop in the bucket to what you're losing. But the question is, okay, this soul came back. Obviously, this was a Jewish soul. So it should have been a religious soul way when? Because that's what was going on. Yeah, there were Jews that strayed here and there. But again, most of the Jews throughout the millennium, they kept Torah mitzvahs, whatever level. So what happens to that Jewish soul? So, that Jewish soul is reconnected. What happened to the other Jewish souls that assimilated into marriage? They got killed. They made their own choice. But that soul now is in big trouble. 90% of world Jewry in big trouble. Big trouble. 60-70% into marriage rate, it's a cleansing process. Cleansing process. So these souls are going to get severely punished. Right? A lot of them either get destroyed or get spiritually cut off, before the Messiah comes. Who says they're going to be saved? I don't see that. You're only going to have a remnant left. The ones that are strong in keeping Torah mitzvahs. That's all you're going to have left. I don't care what the numbers suggest. Reform and conservative, they're all dying. All these shuls, they had, 900 members, 1,000 members, this one, that one, they're all dying, they're all selling. Why? Because they can't pass it down. It's an impossibility to pass down. They'll say, well, it's a good try. The kids don't want it. Parents don't want it. Parents just want a trinkling of it. They have something. They have something because their parents gave it to them. And their parents gave it to them, so it's stronger. But the further diluted, further down it goes, it gets much more diluted. Much, much more diluted. Right? You have people coming back. You have Jews that are coming back to their roots. But the vast majority are going to get wiped off the face of the map spiritually. That's what you have. You have 90% being wiped out. People say in your community, people are dropping off. Not at 90% intervals. If you're lucky, maybe it's 10%. Maybe. And that's a jump. So that means 9 out of 10 are keeping what they're supposed to keep and they'll pass it down. Here you got a 1 in 9 chance to pass it down. Right? But I remember once I was telling someone, by divorce. I said in the secular world, divorce is like 60%. Right? Or higher. In the ultra-Orthodox world, maybe, let's say it's 10%. Let's say. They say, see, it's on the rise. Cognitive dissonance. I said, but in your world, it's a 6-time chance. It's going to be 6 times greater the chance of getting divorced than in my world. Oh, but your world doesn't believe in divorce. Of course we do. It's on the books. Torah says you're allowed to get divorced. But we say you should work at it. You should try it. If you can't fix it, okay. God sheds tears on the altar. Someone gets divorced. He doesn't want people to get divorced. But it's on the books. People get divorced. They say, but see, it's on the rise. It's on the rise. Again, it's like talking to a brick. If I tell you get a 6 times greater chance, of getting divorced, they come with all kinds of excuses why we're bad. Look at what the statistics show. Marriage is in, the idea of marriage today is in a bad state. Very bad state. Except by us. Well, the Christians don't believe in divorce. So that's a different issue. But saying by us. By us, it's strong. I'm not saying there aren't issues, but it's strong. Yeah, but it's on the rise. Okay. Even so, I got a 6 times greater chance it's not going to happen. I'll take those odds. Yeah, any other questions? Someone points out, I was gonna mention that. It's a good point. And that is, whatever happens, the soul was there, wasn't there, whatever, you're given a golden opportunity right now. You should be kissing the ground you have this opportunity. Because look what's going on in the world. I just saw something where, I think in Boston, at the 2nd grade or 3rd grade, they're already starting to teach about gender issues. Kid is 7 years old. That's insanity. You can say people can say whatever they want about us and what we do and our customs and this and that. That is absolute insanity. Teaching a kid that young. Insanity. But, we're crazy. We're the crazy ones. People should be, kissing the ground they have this. That they can learn. They know what the truth is. They can get inspired. They know which direction to go. I mean, there's a lot of things. A lot of things to be ecstatic about. Ecstatic. You see what's going on in the world? You just want to close the door. You think you have to go to the mikveh just when you walk outside. It's nasty what's going on. Can't look at anything, can't hear anything. I mean, it's crazy. Again, people can take their shots at us, fine. But that world is sick. Is seriously sick. And it's certainly not getting better. It's certainly not getting better. And teaching these things to kids at such a young age. It'd be terrible to raise kids in this generation. Who knows who they're going to come out like? It's crazy. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? How about Christian wives and children? That's a hard thing. Got to lead by example. I don't think you can push too hard. If they want to see information, you can show it to them. But what they say, you can't bring the horse to drink. Like I say, people will return to Judaism and they learn at a high level, whatever, and their family wants nothing to do with them. But they know if they ever want information, that's where they're going to go, right? That person knows something about Torah, hopefully, and they don't go because they're not interested. So what can a person do? Nothing to do. Tragic. You can help all the people in the world except yourself, okay? Right? In this case, I wouldn't tell someone to get divorced because of it, unless there are other issues. Right? You can try to bring things up, but if you see there's staunch opposition, then I just leave it. It's someone told me for a while, I don't know, years, it was a number of years, this person was being a Noahide and he just got totally ridiculed by his wife. Over and over and over. They were like staunch Christians, like real Bible thumpers. And this guy got trashed. Now, something like that could destroy a marriage. That for sure could destroy a marriage. But this guy persevered and she came along eventually. But that's a rough time. It's a rough thing to go through. So, if you're learning something, hey, I just learned this, whatever, you see, you have to gauge. You have to gauge, see if, they're interested in hearing new ideas. You'd be surprised. People are not as open-minded as they think. I can say in my own case, I can speak to people about all kinds of things. What's one thing you can't say? What's a 4-letter word? Religion. Torah. You can speak about anything else. Sports, politics, this, that. One thing you can't speak about. Religion. Don't convert me. I remember I had family came to visit once, and my cousins, I was talking, and someone makes the comment, says, don't convert them. Meaning, don't make them like me. So I said, it's impossible. They said, why? I said, I'm talking about basketball. I was like, I'm talking about sports. You think I'm talking about Torah mitzvahs? There's a limit. There's a limit. You can try and show things, but you got to be very delicate. I think, it's one of the hardest things, as most people know, coming out of Christianity, is the fact that you got to give up JC. If you don't give up JC, you're going to fry in hell forever. That's a hard thing. That's like the last straw, unless you really believe he's not the real thing. So that, like someone would say, and someone told me this, one of the parents said, what, you think I've been in the church 50 years? I've been lied to? Yeah. You've been totally duped. I don't want to hear it. How could I give it up? Freedom, trial. I can't imagine they lied to me. Well, you want to look at information? No. Right. So who's really that open-minded today? I would tell you, not too many people. I've had people tell me we can agree, disagree. We can argue. We're going to disagree. Give me where I'm wrong. Oh, you're at it. Show me. Show me. A lot of things. Yeah, whatever. But, you're not telling me what I'm doing is wrong. You just don't want to do it. It's a different issue. But you just want to go after I want to do whatever I want. That means it's not true. Oh, it's got no relevance. Oh, I can show you relevance. Not interested. It's like not the best book. No. Just kidding. What do you do with that? Nothing to do. It's like talking to a brick. People like, if there's somebody to talk to in argumentative, good, you have a chance to get to them. But if the biggest question they ever ask in their lifetime is, I put ketchup or mustard on my hot dog, that's withholding. You're not going to convince them. They're not interested. Someone asks, I'll just give one example. Someone once asked me, about life after death. They said, can you explain that in 30 seconds? So I knew, thinking fast, if I would even start to talk, within 5 seconds, they tell me to stop. So I said, I got a video, I'll send you a link. That's what I said. I don't know if they watched it, they didn't watch it. I sent them a link. But do you think they're going to listen to me for 30 seconds? Never happened. Because what happens if I'm right? Then the whole life is a travesty of a mockery of a sham. They don't want to hear it. But I'm the one who's closed-minded. They're not closed-minded. I once told someone, they said, oh, send your kids to university, this, that. I said, okay, I'll send my kids to university. You send your 2 boys to yeshiva. Oh, I would never do that. That's a cult. So something like that, not much you can do. If they want to see, they'll see. If they don't, again, you can do it gingerly. You can't ram it down their throat. You do it gingerly. Say, that's what I'm just saying, whatever. And see where it goes. But if there's a lot of friction, then, I just wouldn't bring it up. That was any point. Yeah, any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop here. We're going to pick this up next week. Anyone has any questions, feel free. You can send me an email, and we'll see everyone next week. We're having a good middle of the day, or almost end of the day for me, and everyone have a great rest of the week.